Airlines spent years dumping a plane they called a catastrophe. They flew them into desert boneyards, ripped out the seats, and left them to bake in the sun. Some carriers took it further and physically scrapped theirs into aluminum scrap. The manufacturer that built it shut the whole program down. Everyone agreed it was the most expensive mistake the industry had ever made. And then, almost overnight, those exact same airlines started spending tens of millions of dollars to drag those planes back out of the desert. We know why they killed it. What nobody can explain is why they're begging to get it back. The plane is the Airbus A380, the largest passenger aircraft ever built, a double-decker giant that could swallow more than 500 passengers in a single departure. When Airbus rolled it out in the 2000s, it was supposed to be the future of long-haul travel. Instead, it became a punchline. Airbus announced in 2019 that it would end production, and the final aircraft was handed over to Emirates in December of 2021. The Super Jumbo era was declared over. So why does that story matter to you right now? Because the very same plane the entire industry pronounced financially dead has quietly become one of the hottest assets in the sky, and the reason behind it exposes a crack in global aviation that nobody saw coming. To understand the panic, you have to understand the funeral. For years, the math behind the A380 simply stopped making sense. It was built around 4 enormous engines, and 4 engines drink fuel. While the A380 was guzzling, a new generation of twin-engine jets arrived. The Airbus A350 and the Boeing 787 could fly enormous distances on 2 efficient engines, burning a fraction of the fuel per seat. The 4-engine giant looked like a dinosaur the moment those twins landed. Then there was the size problem. The A380's wingspan stretched to nearly 80 meters, so wide that airports around the world had to spend millions redesigning gates, widening taxiways, and rebuilding boarding bridges just to let it park. It demanded special everything, and that cost money before a single passenger boarded. But the real killer was a mindset shift. Airlines stopped believing in the giant hub. The old model funneled passengers through a few mega airports on enormous planes. The new thinking was point-to-point, smaller flexible jets flying travelers directly where they wanted to go. The A380 was built for a world that was disappearing. Therefore, when the pandemic hit and global demand fell off a cliff, trying to fill 500 seats became financial suicide. The giants were parked, and most of the world assumed they would never fly again. But the funeral was premature, because 2 things were about to break at the exact same time. Then 2 things broke at once, and together they reversed everything. The first break was the supply chain. Airlines had bet the future on those efficient twin jets, but the planes simply weren't arriving. Boeing's 777X, the massive twin many expected to absorb high-capacity demand, slid into delay after delay, pushed to 2026 or later. Airbus had years-long backlogs for the A350. So when revenge travel exploded after the pandemic and passengers came flooding back, airlines reached for new widebodies and found empty hangars. There were physically not enough big planes to go around. The second break was even harder to fix because you can't manufacture your way out of it. The world's most valuable airports were full, not full of planes on a busy afternoon, but structurally maxed out. London Heathrow, New York's JFK, Sydney, all running at their ceiling. An airline could not simply buy another takeoff slot at Heathrow no matter how much cash it waved around, because there were no more slots to sell. Now sit with what that combination actually means. Demand was breaking all-time records. Airlines wanted to grow, but they couldn't add more flights, and they couldn't get new planes. There was exactly one move left on the board. If you can't add departures, you make each departure bigger. Suddenly, the A380's 500 seats stopped looking like a liability and started looking like a weapon. The thing everyone mocked, its monstrous size, became the only way to grow revenue at a maxed-out airport. The serial numbers on those parked giants suddenly told a completely different story. The serial numbers told a different story because the planes rotting in the desert were now worth more flying than parked, and the airlines that had publicly buried the A380 were the first ones forced to eat their words. Qatar Airways is the perfect example. The carrier's chief executive at the time, Akbar Al-Baker, stood up in 2021 everyone and called buying the A380 the biggest mistake in the airline's history. It was a brutal public condemnation. And yet, when capacity got tight, Qatar was dragging those same condemned giants back out of storage and putting them back into the sky. Lufthansa did something almost identical. The German carrier had signaled its A380s would not return. Therefore, everyone assumed those jets were finished. Instead, Lufthansa quietly spent millions reactivating 8 of them, hauling them out of long-term desert storage and pouring money into making them airworthy again. Reactivating a stored A380 is not flipping a switch. It means inspections, replaced components, fresh certification, and teams of engineers crawling over every system. Airlines do not spend that kind of money on a plane they hate unless the alternative is worse, and the alternative was turning away paying passengers they had no way to carry. So the surface answer to our mystery is now clear. The A380 came back because the industry painted itself into a corner. Too much demand, too few planes, too few airport slots. The giant everyone called a corpse was the only thing big enough to plug the gap. That should be the end of the story. But it isn't, because while the airlines were panic reactivating their own jets, a far stranger group of players had quietly started moving in the background. And what they were doing made no sense at all unless you understood what they knew that the rest of us didn't. Because the lessors weren't selling out of charity and Emirates wasn't buying out of nostalgia, to see the real game, you have to follow who actually owned these planes. Most people assume airlines own the aircraft they fly. Often they don't. They lease them from finance companies, paying monthly to use a jet someone else holds the title to. A huge chunk of the world's A380s were owned by these leasing firms, and for years those firms were terrified because they were stuck holding the most unwanted aircraft on Earth. A leased A380 coming off contract was supposed to be worthless, a multi-hundred-million-dollar asset with no buyer. Then Emirates made a move that rewrote the rules. The airline didn't just keep flying the A380s it already had. It went out and bought more, purchasing 5 A380s outright from a leasing company called Doric Nimrod Air 2 for around $200 million total. Read that carefully. Emirates was buying used super jumbos that the rest of the industry had written off entirely. Why would the single largest A380 operator on Earth go shopping for more of a plane everyone else fled? Because Emirates cannot run its Dubai hub without them. Its entire business is built on funneling global traffic through one mega airport on the biggest planes possible. By buying the jets outright instead of leasing, Emirates kills expensive lease payments forever and locks down the airframes for the long haul. Just as crucially, it secures a supply of spare parts. Every A380 it owns is also a future organ donor for the rest of its fleet, and in a world where nobody builds these anymore, parts are gold. The real story was just beginning, because the buyers weren't only the giants. Someone with no fleet at all was about to enter the picture. A startup with no planes and no routes was now hunting for the most unwanted aircraft in the world. And that single fact destroyed the last surviving myth about the A380. For years, the industry told itself a comforting story. Even if a few desperate airlines reactivated their own jets, nobody would ever want a second-hand A380. The market was dead. The resale value was a fantasy. Then a brand new company called Global Airlines appeared, acquiring used A380s with the goal of launching transatlantic flights. A startup, choosing the plane the entire industry had abandoned as its founding bet. Think about how insane that looks on paper. A new airline has every aircraft in history to choose from. It could pick efficient, cheap-to-run twin jets like everyone else. Instead, it went straight for the 4-engine giant that bankrupted the dreams of legacy carriers. But here's where it comes together. A startup can't buy a brand new widebody because the order books are jammed and delivery slots stretch years out. It can't snatch airport slots from the entrenched giants either. So what's left? A pre-owned A380, available right now, with more premium seats than almost anything flying, perfect for splashy long-haul launches that get attention. That's the moment the secondary market flipped. Suddenly there were 3 different kinds of buyers all chasing the same airframe. Legacy carriers panic reactivating their own jets, Emirates buying off-lease planes to dodge lease costs and stockpile parts, and startups grabbing them because nothing else was available. The leasing companies that had been terrified of holding worthless A380s woke up to find their dead assets had quietly come back to life. The thing nobody could give away had become something people competed to own, which raised the most uncomfortable question question of all. If this plane is so unwanted, why is the biggest operator on Earth now betting billions that it flies for another 20 years? Emirates is now betting billions on a corpse, and that bet tells you this revival is not a temporary patch. It's a long-term gamble on a plane that was supposed to be extinct. Emirates is currently investing billions into a massive retrofit program. It is tearing out the interiors of its A380s, ripping out old cabins and installing new premium economy sections and modernized suites. You do not gut and rebuild the inside of an aircraft you plan to scrap in a few years. This is an airline placing a financial bet that the A380 keeps flying well into the 2040s. The plane Airbus stopped building. The plane Qatar's boss called a mistake. The plane Lufthansa swore was finished is being given a second life measured in decades. And here's the detail that ties the whole story together, the thing that makes this revival so hard to walk away from. After everything, there is still no true one-to-one replacement for the A380 in production today. None. Boeing's big twin is delayed. The largest upcoming twin jets still fall short of the A380's raw seat count. The industry killed the giant assuming something better would come along to take its place and that something never fully arrived. So the airlines are stuck with a strange truth. The plane they buried is also the only plane that solves the exact problem strangling them right now. That's the double twist of this entire story. The A380 wasn't a failure of engineering, it was a failure of timing. It was a plane built for a future of packed mega hubs and slot-constrained airports, launched into an era obsessed with fuel efficiency and smaller jets. It got punished for arriving too early. Then the world it was designed for showed up about 15 years late, and the giant turned out to be exactly what everyone needed all along. But here's the piece nobody can answer yet. If the A380 is this valuable, this irreplaceable, this in demand, then why is no manufacturer rushing to build a modern successor? The demand is screaming, the airports are full, the orders would be there, and still the assembly lines stay dark. Either the giants of the sky make a stunning comeback this decade, or the world's busiest airports slowly choke on their own success with no machine big enough to save them. So the plane the industry left for dead is now the asset it can't live without, and nobody is building another one. Whether this is a true comeback or just the world buying time before the next crisis is the question hanging over every maxed out runway on Earth.